Imagine a man who can freeze a chaotic nation with a single radio broadcast, but cannot stop the quiet, calculated smile of the rival, who's already planning his fall. A man given less than 1,000 days to try to cleanse Nigeria of corruption, and even less time to understand that the real battle isn't on the streets, but inside the army mess, over dinner, with one pair of eyes watching him too closely. That man is Tunde Idiagbon. To understand how he becomes the iron shadow behind a head of state, feared and obeyed by millions, we have to start far from the capital, long before the countdown on his life and career begins. September 14, 1963, Ilorin, a town of red dust and low, sunburnt houses in what will later become Kwara State. In the early morning, the call to prayer drifts over corrugated roofs. Inside a modest family compound, a newborn cries, loud, insistent, as if complaining that the world is already too noisy, too disordered. His parents name him Baba Tunde Abdulbaki Idiagbon, but everyone will know him simply as Tunde. He grows up in a house where discipline is not a slogan, it's air. His father is stern, religious, with a sense of order shaped by both tradition and the new colonial administration. Shoes are lined up, mats are folded, words are measured. When Tunde leaves water in a cup or grain in a plate, he doesn't get a lecture. He gets silence, a disappointed look that hurts more than any slap. Outside, Ilorin is a crossroads. Yoruba, Hausa, Fulani, a border of cultures and powers. Men talk about the British, about chiefs, about the new schools. Boys play in dusty fields with sticks as rifles, shouting commands, lying in wait behind termite mounds. Tunde is usually the one not shouting. He watches. He notices who cheats, who lies, who keeps promises when there's no adult watching. What shocks him as he grows older is how easily adults break their own rules. He sees a respected elder take gifts in secret and then thunder about honesty in public. He watches a local official shake hands with a traitor and then lose his documents until extra money appears. In the evenings, when the lantern throws shadows on the clay walls, young Tunde lies awake, feeling something hardening in his chest, a simple thought that will guide his whole life. If there are no consequences, people will always choose the easy wrong over the hard right. In 1960, the Nigerian flag rises for the first time over a newly independent nation. In Ilorin, crowds gather around radios, faces shining with hope and sweat. The streets are alive with drums and promises. Freedom, the politicians say. Prosperity. For a moment, the country feels like a young runner at the starting block. Lungs full, eyes bright, but in the corners of government buildings and smoky back rooms, deals are already being cut. Tunde, now a teenager, hears his elders mutter, "Independence has only changed the color of the hand in our pocket." He sees new Nigerian officials drive cars as big as small boats, while children run barefoot beside them. The contrast sears itself into him like a brand. He does something unusual for a boy from his background. He chooses the army, not because he dreams of glory or medals, because the army, in his mind, is the last place where rules are rules, where a uniform means something, where there is a chain of command instead of a chain of bribes. He sits the entrance exams, each question a stepping stone away from Ilorin's small injustices towards something larger, colder, more exact. He knows there are limited slots. He knows very simply that if he fails this year, the next intake may be smaller, competition's tougher, his family older and less patient with his ambitions. There is a deadline hanging over him like the Harmattan sky. Succeed now, or go back to a life where power belongs to whoever shouts the loudest. He passes. The Nigerian Military Training College in Kaduna is another planet. The air smells of metal, oil, and sweat. Boots slam in unison against gravel. In the early morning, a whistle tears through the barracks, dragging half-asleep cadets into the cold. Tunde excels in the parts others hate. The drills, the inspections, the repetition. He shines not because he's the strongest, but because nothing is ever good enough to him. A loose button is a failure. A late salute is weakness. It is here among the parade grounds and lecture halls that he first notices another young officer who seems to bend the atmosphere around him. Ibrahim Babangida. Quick smile, easy handshake, the kind of man who remembers names, who can charm a sergeant and a colonel in the same afternoon. Where Tunde is reserved, Ibrahim is warm. Where Tunde stands ramrod straight, Ibrahim stands loose, relaxed, as if the world is already his. They are not enemies, not yet. They share meals, run drills side by side, exchange quiet jokes in the shade. But beneath every conversation, there is an invisible ledger. Who got praised by which instructor? Who was chosen for which assignment? And who was invited into whose office? In the army, friendship and competition grow on the same thin stalk. The first crack in Nigeria's young democracy hits like a rifle shot in a silent room. January 1966. Tunde is now a young officer, posted to a unit already buzzing with rumors. Talk of politicians stealing millions. Talk of rigged elections. Talk of something bigger coming. Then before dawn, the rumors grow teeth. Shots ring out. Senior politicians fall. Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa is abducted. The army, the institution Tunde has trusted to be above politics, is suddenly at the center of everything. He wakes to chaos. Boots running, orders shouted, the sharp, controlled panic of men who know that one wrong move can make them traitors, or heroes depending on who wins by morning. For perhaps the first time, Tunde feels the weight of time as a weapon. In hours, not days. He must choose what to do, how to act, whom to obey. There is no committee meeting, no debate, only a simple truth. If he hesitates, his career, or his life, may end in a corridor somewhere, face down on concrete. The coup succeeds, then fails, then mutates into something else. Regional tensions flare, counter-coups rise. The illusion that the army is one family shatters. Blood stains the uniforms that were supposed to be above tribal lines. Tunde watches older officers fall, some murdered by men they had trained. He watches mild-mannered colleagues become executioners with trembling hands. He learns another harsh rule. Power is never empty. If you don't take it, someone else will. And they'll decide what happens to you. Somewhere in this blur of coups and counter-coups, Tunde and Ibrahim's paths cross again. They stand in the same briefing rooms, listening to the same rumors. But their instincts are different. Ibrahim moves easily among cliques, reading the mood, cracking jokes even when the air tastes of gunpowder. Tunde goes the other way, deeper into discipline, into obedience, determined that his survival will not depend on gossip or charm, but on being too useful, too competent to discard. Then comes the Civil War, 1967 to 1970. The map of Nigeria splits and then bleeds. Tunde, now an infantry officer, is sent east. The first thing that hits him is the silence of abandoned villages, the way a whole settlement can vanish overnight, leaving only cooking pots and a child's shoe in the dust. He sees bodies, too many bodies, and learns to step past them without looking too closely. Because if he looks too closely at one, he will have to look at them all. He commands men who are barely older than the boys who used to play with him in Ilorin's streets. Under fire, he's like stone. No jokes, no shouting, just quiet, precise orders that somehow cut through the roar of artillery. He punishes looting harshly, sometimes more harshly than his superiors think is necessary. He has soldiers made to stand for hours in the blazing sun for stealing food from civilians. He has others flogged for abandoning their posts. He is not cruel for pleasure. He is cruel because he believes with a fanatic clarity that soldiers who cannot obey in small things will break in big ones. And when they break, people die. The war changes him. It confirms his suspicion that Nigerian civilian leaders were playing games with lives they didn't have to risk themselves. He sees the cost of bad politics measured not in newspaper headlines, but in blood and amputated limbs. He stores the anger away, like a weapon he isn't ready to use yet. When the war ends, Lagos celebrates. Tunde does not. He returns to barracks where, inside officers' messes, the new language is oil. Oil money. Contracts, allocations. In a few years, the Nigerian state leaps from poverty to sudden, dizzying wealth. And with it comes a rot he can smell as strongly as sweat and gun oil. Cars grow bigger. Compounds grow higher walls. Generators hum through the night. Everywhere he turns, someone is getting rich without getting tired. He is promoted. Captain, major, lieutenant colonel. His file is clean, his record impressive. He is the man you send when something must be done on time, by the book, with no excuses. On paper, the Army rewards such men. In practice, he watches officers who bend the rules, who cultivate powerful friends, who know how to drink and flatter, rise even faster. Officers like Ibrahim. By the mid-1970s, Ibrahim Babangida is becoming a star of the Nigerian Army. Charismatic, close to power. The kind of officer politicians remember by name. He and Tunde still exchange greetings, still share brief laughs over old memories, but the gap between them is widening in a way they both can feel. One night in Lagos, at a noisy officers' party, the contrast is almost theatrical. Ibrahim moves from table to table, a glass in hand, telling a story that sends a ring of colonels into booming laughter. He is relaxed, almost casual. Heads turn when he arrives. Tunde sits at a corner table, alone with a folder of papers. He is reviewing deployment lists, circling names, double-checking logistics. A younger officer leans over and asks why he isn't joining the fun. Tunde looks up, expression flat. If we are laughing, he says, it should be because we've done our work. It's a small moment, unnoticed by most, but it marks the line. Two visions of power, one built on networks, on human warmth and tactical smiles, the other built on documents, timetables, and the hard comfort of rules. In years to come, that line will become a fault line, 1975 brings another sudden turn. A group of officers led by Murtala Muhammad and Olusegun Obasanjo topples the government in a swift coup. Tunde, in the middle ranks, is not among the plotters, but he is among those who must make the new order work. He sees Murtala move fast, purging corrupt officials, reorganizing systems, acting with a speed and ferocity that Tunde quietly admires. Here, at last, is a leader who seems to understand that time is not infinite, that you cannot negotiate indefinitely with decay. Then, in 1976, Murtala is assassinated in a failed coup. Gunfire again, radio broadcasts again. Once more, Nigeria is a country where the direction of history is decided by who controls a handful of key buildings before sunrise. During the crisis, Ibrahim Babangida cements his reputation. He plays a visible role in confronting the mutineers, walking into danger with a gambler's nerve. Stories about his bravery spread like wildfire through the barracks. Tunde hears them all. He respects courage, always. But he also notices something else. How Ibrahim emerges from the chaos not only alive, but more central than ever, closer to the heart of power. The rivalry sharpens, even if neither man will ever admit it. In 1978, Tunde's life takes a decisive turn from pure soldiering into something more political, even if he refuses to call it that. He is appointed military administrator of Borno State, in the far northeast. Borno is harsh country, wide skies, stubborn earth. People who have learned to survive where the land doesn't care if you live or die. As he flies over it for the first time, looking down at scattered settlements and thin roads, Tunde feels a new weight. This is not just a battalion. This is a state, a whole mini-country placed in his hands. The timing could not be tighter. The military government under Obasanjo has announced a return to civilian rule. There is a transition plan, a fixed date for handover to an elected civilian president in 1979. That means Tunde, as administrator, has less than 2 years to repair what he can, impose order where he can, and prepare to hand. Over to politicians he privately does not trust, he is on a clock again. In Maiduguri, the state capital, civil servants quickly learn that the new man from Ilorin is not like the ones before him. Meetings start on time. Locked doors for those who are late. Files piled under desks suddenly matter. Inspectors appear unannounced in clinics and schools. Stories spread of workers made to cut grass around their own offices as punishment for absenteeism. Of officials called out by name in front of their peers. Some hate him for it. Some fear him. Some secretly are relieved. In one vivid scene that will be retold long after he leaves, Tunde visits a government hospital unannounced. The waiting room is full. Nurses are chatting in a back room, oblivious. A doctor is nowhere to be found. Tunde says nothing at first. He walks slowly through the ward, taking in every detail. The broken fan, the stained wall, the child crying beside an exhausted mother on a bench. Then, in a voice that cuts the room like cold wind, he orders every staff member to assemble. There, in the courtyard under the sun, he reads out their names and duties, one by one, asking each a simple question. If your own child were lying on that bench, would you behave like this? No one answers. He does not need them to. The point is made, but even as he drills discipline into Borno's bureaucracy, the political clock above his head is ticking louder. In Lagos, constitutions are being drafted, parties formed, alliances made. The military is preparing to step back, at least on paper. Tunde, ever the soldier, follows the plan. He does his job. He organizes elections. He hands over with a straight face. Yet at night in the governor's residence, when the lights are low and the call to prayer has faded, he listens to radio reports of new civilian politicians boasting, promising, bargaining. They sound to him like the men he watched betray their own speeches in Ilorin decades earlier. He feels a familiar chill, the same pattern, now on a national scale. By 1979, when he leaves Borno, the civilian Second Republic is born. Shehu Shagari is president. The army steps back into the barracks, uniforms officially distanced from politics. Officers like Ibrahim find ways to remain close to the center, advising quietly, building networks. Officers like Tunde retreat into postings that look ordinary on the surface, but carry their own quiet influence. Nigeria, for a brief moment, appears calm. Oil money still flows, though less freely. The streets are busy, markets loud, campuses alive with debate. But underneath, the numbers are turning ugly. Debts rising, corruption ballooning, public services sagging. Each scandal, an inflated contract here, a missing shipment there, is another grain of sand sliding down an invisible hourglass. Tunde watches this with increasing fury, but it is a controlled fury. He returns to staff positions in the army, his reputation as a strict, incorruptible officer following him like a shadow. Younger officers whisper his name with a mix of fear and admiration. Senior officers know that if you want something enforced without compromise, you send Tunde. In mess halls and offices, he hears a new kind of talk, not the hot-headed chatter of junior officers dreaming of glory, but the cold, measured conversations of colonels and brigadiers who feel the country slipping. "We cannot just watch," someone says. "At this rate, there will be nothing left." "We gave them power," another replies. "Now they're eating it." Somewhere in those conversations, another name keeps surfacing. Buhari. Muhammadu Buhari. A quiet, serious officer like Tunde, with a reputation for integrity and a cool, almost frightening calm. Their paths converge, professionally first, then ideologically. They are not exactly friends, but they recognize something of themselves in each other. A shared intolerance for waste, a shared belief that Nigeria needs order before it can have anything else. In a different corner of the same army, Ibrahim is also listening, also watching. Where Tunde and Buhari see decay and threat, Ibrahim sees something else as well. Opportunity. Every failure of the civilian politicians makes the military look, to many Nigerians, like the last resort. The question is not whether the army will move again. The question is who will move first, and under whose command. It is the early 1980s now. Oil prices fall. The naira weakens. Queue lines grow longer. Newspapers complain. Students march. The sense of a nation running out of time hangs in the air like harmattan dust. Fine everywhere. Inescapable. In a small office late one evening, fluorescent tubes flickering, a wall map of Nigeria pin-marked in red, Tunde sits at a desk piled with reports, inflation figures, crime statistics, intelligence briefings on smuggling and kickbacks. He reads them the way a doctor reads a terminal diagnosis. Outside, a radio plays high-life music. Inside, the second hand of the clock above his desk ticks loudly, each click another tiny reminder that he has already lived through. One independence, one civil war, multiple coups, and a failed experiment with military-led reform. Now, watching the Second Republic stumble toward the same cliff, he feels the old anger sharpen into something else. Resolve. He doesn't yet know the exact date. He doesn't yet know the precise plan. He doesn't yet see the full outline of the rival who will one day move against him. But somewhere, deep inside, Major General Tunde Idiagbon has already crossed a line. The quiet boy from Ilorin, who once believed that discipline alone could fix a broken system, is beginning to accept a harsher truth. To impose order on a country running out of time, he may have to step out from behind the files and into the dangerous, shifting light of power. And when he does, his old colleague Ibrahim will not be watching from the sidelines. He will be standing right beside him. Standing beside you on the night of a coup is not the same as standing with you when the knives finally come out. On paper, they will call it a palace revolution, a correction, a bloodless takeover. In reality, for Major General Tunde Idiagbon, it begins in the same way all Nigerian turning points seem to begin. With darkness, with whispers, with a clock ticking toward midnight, while the nation has no idea that by dawn, its government will have expired like sour milk. Late 1983, Lagos is humid, restless, and exhausted. The Second Republic is staggering. Newspapers scream about missing millions, padded import licenses, rice scandals. At petrol stations, queues curl like snakes around the block. Drivers sleep in their cars, shirts stuck to their backs with sweat. In markets, the price of a bag of rice climbs faster than the salary of the civil servant trying to buy it. People are tired of hearing that things will get better soon. Inside barracks, soon has become a bitter joke. Officers who once believed in giving civilian rule a chance now sit in dim rooms, the power cutting in and out, candles burning low, now as they study reports of economic freefall and political games. Among them is Tunde, his face lit by the pale glow of a desk lamp, fingers resting on a stack of intelligence summaries thicker than some of the new ministers' CVs. He doesn't slam the table, he doesn't shout. He only asks the same question over and over, in different meetings with different men. If we do nothing, what will Nigeria look like in 5 years? No one has a reassuring answer. In these quiet, dangerous conversations, a shape begins to form. Not just dissatisfaction, but intention. Certain names are repeated with respect. Buhari, the straight-backed major general who commands trust. And increasingly, another name. Idiagbon, the man who can make plans happen on time, who does not drink with contractors, who signs nothing he has not read. There is a moment, never recorded in any official minutes, when the idea stops being, someone should do something, and becomes, we will. The twist is that the circle is not closed. To remove an elected government, they will need more than a reputation for discipline. They will need tanks, troops, and the loyalty of formations across the country. They will need the man who controls the army's beating heart, the chief of army staff. They will need Ibrahim Babangida, the same Ibrahim who once cracked jokes with Tunde under the Kaduna sun, who walked into danger during the 1976 coup attempt and emerged a hero. The same man whose laughter can loosen a tense room, whose handshake has become a kind of currency. This is the moment when the rivalry that has simmered quietly for years slides into the center of the stage. Even if no one says it aloud, to succeed, Tunde must depend on the very man he does not fully trust. To stay relevant, Ibrahim must support the very pair, Buhari and Idiagbon, whose severity threatens his more flexible style of power. They will stand side by side for a while. The night itself is almost anticlimactic. December 31st, 1983. While most Nigerians prepare for New Year's Eve parties, for church vigils, for fireworks that will streak briefly against the sky, small groups of soldiers slip out of barracks, engines idling low. In Lagos, the city's neon lights shimmer off lagoon water, masking the movement of trucks toward key sites. The radio station, the airport, the presidential residence. Tunde is not a man of theatrics. He is not the officer firing a rifle into the air, not the one making cinematic dashes through corridors. His role is sharper, quieter. He is the one whose signature on planning sheets has ensured that fuel was secured, that units were briefed, that the right officers were on duty and the wrong ones conveniently sent out of town. He knows that one confused commander, one mistimed move, and the whole thing could collapse into chaos. Firefights in the streets, a split army, a country plunging not into reform but into civil war all over again. The deadline is brutal. The government must fall before it fully understands it is under attack. Hours, not days. Minutes, not hours. As midnight passes, Nigerians count down to a new year. In certain offices, radios are turned down, not up. Men wait for a different kind of countdown. By dawn, President Shehu Shagari's government is finished. The first most people hear of it is not gunfire, but a familiar crackle from their radios. Static, then the solemn voice of a new regime, Muhammadu Buhari speaks slowly, almost flatly, announcing that the military has once again taken over to save the nation from total collapse. Yet the words are heavy with accusation. Indiscipline, corruption, economic disaster. For a moment, in millions of living rooms, there is silence. Then, in many places, something unexpected happens. People cheer. In the crowded streets of Lagos Island, in the dusty lanes of Kano, in Ilorin, where Tunde's family listens in their sitting room, ordinary Nigerians feel a strange, guilty relief. They know coups are dangerous. They know soldiers are not saints. But they also know what they have been living through. The idea of stern men in uniform cleaning house does not yet sound like a threat. It sounds like hope. Within hours, a new name is broadcast alongside Buhari's. Major General Tunde Idiagbon, appointed Chief of Staff, Supreme Headquarters. Effectively the second most powerful man in the country. Inside the barracks, where titles are understood more precisely than in the newspapers, the perception quickly takes shape. Buhari is the head. Idiagbon will be the fist. The arrangement suits both men. Buhari, reserved and taciturn, can remain the austere figurehead. Tunde can be what he has always been, the enforcer, the organizer, the man who makes instructions real. It is Tunde who will chair key meetings, Tunde who will call ministers to account, Tunde whose voice will become notorious over radio and television as the sound of the new order. But as the new regime settles into Dodan barracks, another relationship is quietly being defined, the one between Tunde and Ibrahim. Babangida, kept on as chief of army staff, arrives in the new power structure with a smile and a salute. Outwardly, he is the picture of loyalty. He attends briefings, offers advice, radiates reassurance to officers across the country that the army remains united. Yet even in the first days, the contrast is stark. At one early meeting in a cool, air-conditioned room that still smells faintly of the last government, a debate breaks out about how aggressively to move against perceived enemies of the new regime. Former officials, businessmen, journalists. Some argue for caution, worried about international reactions, about headlines in London and Washington. Tunde cuts through the hesitation. We did not remove a government just to write reports, he says, voice quiet but edged with steel. If we do not show we are serious in the first 3 months, we will never be taken seriously again. He drives his point home with a simple, chilling calculation. They have a short window in which fear will work more efficiently than persuasion. After that, habits will harden, opposition will organize, foreign pressure will intensify. For all their uniforms and weapons, their real power is temporary. Time is their most ruthless enemy. Across the table, Ibrahim leans back, watching. When he speaks, his tone is softer, urging that they think about how things will look, how policies will be perceived, how support within the army must be managed. If Tunde's mind is a ledger of rules, Ibrahim's is a map of relationships. For now, their differences complement each other. Together, their skills make the regime formidable. But the invisible line between them grows a little deeper with each meeting. Outside those rooms, the change is immediate and shocking. Within weeks, retired politicians are arrested, paraded before tribunals, sentenced to long jail terms. Some get sentences so mathematically precise, 63 years, 120 years, that ordinary Nigerians joke darkly that the regime seems to have discovered new lengths of time. The joke hides a nervous admiration. Never before have big men been treated like this. Civil servants arrive at offices to find that lateness is suddenly a punishable offense, not a shared national habit. At airports, customs officers who once extorted quietly in corners now stand ramrod straight, terrified of surprise inspections. Smugglers discover that the old relationships at the ports are no longer reliable. A contraband cargo can now mean not just a fine, but public disgrace. In many of these crackdowns, there is one constant rumor. Idiagbon ordered it. He becomes, in the public imagination, almost mythical, the man whose shadow can reach from Dodin barracks to the back room of a provincial motor park. A minister late to a meeting glances nervously at the door, knowing that if Tunde walks in and finds an empty chair, it is not just embarrassment he should fear. He does not smile much on television. His eyes are hard, his manner terse. To some Nigerians, he feels like a necessary shock, a bitter medicine forced down a nation's throat. To others, he feels like the beginning of something darker, a state where even the smallest mistake can bring the hammer down. All the while, the economic crisis is not pausing out of respect for their uniforms. Oil prices have collapsed. Debts are due. Foreign exchange is scarce. Import restrictions tighten like a noose around a trader's neck. The government must choose between different forms of pain, accept harsh conditions from the International Monetary Fund, or try to endure without external help, knowing that shortages and suffering will follow either way. In long, draining meetings, Tunde hears the arguments from economists, from ministers, from external advisors. He knows that whatever they choose will make them unpopular. There is no painless path. This is where his worldview, forged in Ilorin's small injustices and the horror of the Civil War, asserts itself again. He believes that Nigerians can endure hardship if they believe the hardship is shared fairly, if they see that leaders are not feasting while they are fasting. What he cannot accept is indulgence at the top while sacrifice is demanded at the bottom. His solution is simple and brutal. Cut, restrict, discipline. No more foreign luxuries, no more official waste. Tighten everything. If the people must suffer, the rulers must suffer more. In principle, Ibrahim agrees with the need for discipline. In practice, he sees something else. How quickly resentment can build. How a reputation for severity can turn, in a hungry country, into a target painted on your own chest. He reads the mood in the officers' messes, in the barracks, in the rumor networks that crisscross the country like invisible radio waves. To many inside the military, the new regime feels like a double-edged sword. They support the return to order. They like seeing corrupt politicians in handcuffs. But they do not enjoy being told that their own perks, their own side deals, their own little arrangements are now forbidden. Discipline imposed on others is applauded. Discipline imposed on oneself is another matter. The clock ticks. The world outside Nigeria watches with narrowed eyes. Human rights groups compile lists of journalists detained, of citizens flogged for relatively minor offenses. Foreign governments, happy enough to do business with previous corrupt administrations, suddenly discover a concern for civil liberties. Pressure builds. Nigeria risks isolation at the very moment it needs allies. Tunde is unmoved by lectures from abroad. He argues with cold conviction that the West's concern is less about democracy and more about a government they cannot easily influence. He is not entirely wrong, but even a partially hypocritical world can squeeze a regime through sanctions, withheld loans, diplomatic cold shoulders. The sense of a shrinking time frame becomes almost physical. In his office, beneath a large map of Nigeria and a clock whose ticking fills the pauses in conversation, Tunde begins to speak more openly about urgency. He tells subordinates that they may have only 2 years to reset the country's moral compass, to build habits that will survive after uniforms leave power again. Less than 1,000 days to reverse decades of decay. It is an impossible task, and yet he works as if it is not. Meetings run late into the night. Files stack up. He pushes ministries to perform, often bypassing normal channels, demanding direct reports. When he travels, his visits are unannounced, the better to catch people unprepared. The story spreads of civil servants in some towns keeping their ties on even at home, afraid that the dreaded unplanned inspection may arrive at any time. In these whirlwind months, another initiative begins to take shape in his mind and Buhari's. A campaign that will try to change not just laws, but behavior itself, that will soon become one of the most talked about programs in Nigeria's history. It will have a name so simple it sounds like a slogan on a school wall. War Against Indiscipline. For Tunde, it is not a public relations exercise. It is the logical extension of everything he has believed since he was a boy, staring at a village elder taking secret gifts. If Nigerians can queue properly, arrive on time, keep public spaces clean, respect rules from the smallest to the largest, then corruption at the top will find less fertile soil. Discipline, in his view, is not just a military virtue. It is a national survival strategy. He begins sketching out its contours: task forces, public campaigns, enforcement mechanisms that will reach down into markets and motor parks, into classrooms and bus stops. He is thinking in systems now, not just punishments. As he does, Ibrahim watches, listens, calculates. In private, some officers grumble that this war will turn the military into a kind of moral police, hated for enforcing lines, and sanitation instead of admired for defending borders. Others warn that pushing ordinary people too hard, while the economy still shrinks, is dangerously naive. A few more daring whisper fears that Tunde's influence is becoming too great, his image overshadowing even Buhari's in the public eye. In these murmurs, Ibrahim hears both risk and possibility. For now, he remains the loyal chief of army staff, the bridge between the regime's inner core and the rest of the military. He chairs meetings, offers technical advice, ensures that, on the surface, the army's support for Buhari and Idiagbon is solid. If he has private doubts about their severity, he keeps them wrapped in a warm smile. But somewhere in Doden Barracks, late at night, when most lights are out and the cicadas are louder than the generators, two clocks are ticking. One is on Tunde's wall, measuring how little time he has to turn a country of over 90 million people toward a new way of living. The other is invisible, lodged in the thoughts of officers who are asking themselves a quiet, dangerous question. When the fear and enthusiasm fade, when the queues grow longer and the patience shorter, who will Nigerians blame for their pain? And who will the army choose to follow when the next decisive moment comes? As the war against indiscipline moves from idea to imminent reality, as posters are drafted and directives signed, Tunde Idiagbon strides deeper into the role history has prepared for him. The Iron Lieutenant determined to hammer a chaotic nation into shape before the alarm bell of time finally rings. He does not yet know that the man holding the other clock, measuring not the nation's patience but his, is the same colleague whose easy laugh once echoed across parade grounds in Kaduna, and whose hand will one day give a silent signal that changes both their fates. By the time the first posters appear on crumbling walls and rusty bus stops, the contrast is almost absurd. Bright, clean letters, shouting war against indiscipline over cracked paint and overflowing gutters. It is as if someone has hung a starched white military uniform on a body that has not bathed in weeks. At a crowded bus stop in Lagos, soldiers with whips and stern faces order people into a straight line. The old Nigeria, the one where passengers shove and claw and curse their way into a bus, fights back for a moment in chaos and protest. Then fear wins. People shuffle into a disciplined queue. For the first time in their lives, some Nigerians stand quietly in line, not because it makes sense, but because they are afraid not to. Somewhere in Doden Barracks, Tunde Idiagbon watches scenes like this on a flickering television screen. Arms folded, his expression unreadable. To many viewers, it looks shocking, even humiliating. Adults being treated like unruly schoolchildren, forced to salute the flag, to pick up litter, to arrive at work on time under threat of public punishment. To Tunde, it is proof that the country's sickness is not just in its leaders, but in its habits. If we cannot obey small rules, he tells a gathering of senior officials, how will we respect the big ones? War against indiscipline is not a single policy. It is a campaign that tries to invade every corner of daily life. At dawn, radio jingles urge citizens to form proper queues at bus stops and petrol stations. School children are drilled to pick up trash and sing the national anthem with a seriousness that makes some parents uncomfortable. In ministries, surprise inspections send panicked civil servants scrambling back to their desks, ties adjusted, files hurriedly opened to pretend busyness. In markets, soldiers appear without warning, ordering traders to clean their stalls, to move away from roads, to stop hawking in forbidden areas. The campaign has phases, each with a militaristic title. One targets queuing, another work ethic, another corruption, another patriotism. Decrees multiply. Infractions that once earned a shrug now attract fines, public flogging, or the shame of being forced to stand for hours holding signs that describe your offense. Photos appear in newspapers of men and women with placards reading, "I jumped queue," hanging from their necks like a new kind of necklace. To human rights observers, it looks like collective punishment. To many ordinary Nigerians, It feels like a kind of rough justice that no one has ever dared impose before. They complain about the methods. They wince at the sight of a neighbor being whipped for arriving late to environmental sanitation. But they also notice something difficult to deny. Queues begin to appear where before there was only chaos. Some government offices open on time. Littered streets in a few cities briefly look less like dumping grounds. Tunde moves through this new landscape like a commander on a battlefield. His days blur into a relentless routine. Dawn briefings, mid-morning visits to ministries, afternoon security meetings, evening reports from the field. He rarely jokes. He does not invite journalists for casual interviews. When he appears on television, his words are clipped, his tone dry, his message consistent. Nigeria must change, and it must do so. Now, whatever the discomfort. Inside government, some of his colleagues privately admire his discipline, but fear his inflexibility. Outside, his name acquires a strange double meaning. For those who crave order, Idiagbon becomes shorthand for seriousness, for a government that does not look away. For those who feel hunted by decrees and soldiers' whips, his name is spoken with a mixture of resentment and dread. It is as if he has become less a person and more a principle, an embodiment of rule by punishment. The press, used to a certain rough freedom under previous regimes, quickly discovers that the new order has little patience for criticism. When a prominent newspaper publishes a report suggesting divisions within the military leadership, the reaction is swift and unforgiving. Under a notorious law, Decree 4, journalists can be punished even if the stories they publish are factually true, if those stories are deemed to bring the government into disrepute. One day in a small courtroom, heavy with heat and tension, two reporters stand in the dock, accused under that decree. They are not bomb throwers. They are not foreign agents. They are simply men who wrote what they believed the public had a right to know. Their trial becomes a symbol, for some, of necessary discipline, for others, of creeping tyranny. Outside, their colleagues whisper nervously, wondering who will be next. In a meeting where the case is discussed, some advisors suggest leniency, a gesture that might soften international criticism and ease tension with the press. Tunde listens, his face hard. If we let this pass, he says quietly, then every rumor becomes a weapon. We are fighting for the soul of the country. We cannot allow anyone, even journalists, to undermine that with irresponsible reports. There is a silence after he speaks, the kind of silence that comes when people realize a decision has already, in truth, been made. The journalists are sentenced. Headlines abroad condemn the regime as repressive. At home, the message is clear. Words have consequences, and the line of what can be said in public has moved sharply. The same pattern appears in economic policy. Only this time, the stakes are not just reputations but survival. International creditors, led by the International Monetary Fund, dangle loans before Nigeria, but they come with strings that feel like shackles. Currency devaluation, subsidy removal, a painful restructuring of the economy that will hit the poor hardest. In smoke-filled rooms, economists argue over figures, over models, over projections that stretch 20 years into the future. Buhari leans toward self-reliance, toward rejecting foreign dictates. Tunde, wary of any arrangement that looks like surrender of sovereignty, pushes in the same direction. In one late-night session with tempers frayed and coffee gone cold, Ibrahim Babangida speaks up in a tone that is almost soothing. We must think about perception, he says. If we refuse the IMF, they will say we are stubborn and reckless. If we accept on harsh terms, our people will say we sold them. There must be a middle way. We can negotiate. We can be flexible. And the word hangs in the air like smoke. Flexible. To some ears, it sounds wise. To Tunde, it sounds dangerously close to the old compromises that allowed corruption and dependency to flourish. He looks at Ibrahim, sees the easy smile, the relaxed posture, the way other officers seem to lean toward him. Flexibility is what got us here, Tunde replies. Everyone bending rules, everyone making exceptions. The country needs a spine, not a rubber backbone. The room falls into its now familiar pattern. Tunde speaks for hardness, for sacrifice, for a straight, narrow road. Babangida speaks for balance, for keeping options open, for not pushing people beyond what they can bear. Buhari, weighing both views, leans toward Tunde's stark clarity. The regime rejects the IMF's terms and tries to chart its own course through austerity, import restrictions, and a campaign for homegrown solutions. The consequences arrive almost immediately. The naira weakens on unofficial markets. Smugglers swarm like sharks around new trade barriers, seeking profit in scarcity. Essential commodities become even more precious. At border crossings, truck drivers wait for days as soldiers inspect cargo, searching for banned goods. Sometimes they find them, sometimes they find nothing but worn tires and frustrated men who will return home with empty pockets. In these border zones, The war against indiscipline takes on a more menacing face. Smugglers are marched before cameras, contraband displayed in piles, bags of rice, cartons of frozen chicken, radios, fake drugs. Sentences are harsh. Some are imprisoned for decades. Rumors spread that in a few cases, traffickers face the firing squad. The message is clear. The days of easy profit from cheating the system are over. Yet for every genuine smuggler caught, there is an innocent trader stopped and questioned. A small businessman driven out by rules he barely understands. Resentment simmers. Indiscipline becomes a word people use with a bitter edge, as if it were a crime to be merely human, to be late, to be poor, to be desperate. And still, Tunde pushes. He throws himself into foreign policy with the same intensity he applies at home. As de facto number 2, he travels abroad, speaks at regional conferences, projects an image of Nigeria as a country determined to clean its house, defend its dignity, and stand against injustice. The regime takes a hard line against apartheid South Africa, supports liberation movements, and insists that African nations must not be lectured to by former colonial powers. But the world sees not only principle, it also sees the Diko affair, a botched attempt to kidnap a former Nigerian minister, Umaru, Diko in London and bundle him home in a crate. The episode, worthy of a spy novel, ends in international embarrassment when British authorities open the container and find a drugged, bound man inside. Headlines scream. Nigeria is accused of behaving like a gangster state. Relations with the United Kingdom plunge. Inside Doden barracks, an icy anger fills the air. Intelligence chiefs are grilled. Fingers are pointed. Officially, the government denies involvement, distances itself. Unofficially, everyone understands the message that had been sent. Corrupt exiles will not find easy refuge abroad. Tunde, who has little patience for those who loot a nation and then hide behind foreign passports, regards the uproar with a grim kind of irony. Countries that welcomed stolen wealth now cry foul because of the methods used to retrieve its owners, but even he cannot ignore the cost. Nigeria's image darkens, investors hesitate, diplomats grow colder. Each step the regime takes to demonstrate toughness seems to tighten the circle of its isolation. Within the military, meanwhile, another circle is tightening, the one around Tunde himself. War against indiscipline does not distinguish between civilians and soldiers. Tunde insists that officers must obey the same standards they enforce. Inspections of barracks, audits of military spending, investigations into officers' side businesses send shivers through a class used to certain privileges. Some grumble that the campaign has gone too far, that it humiliates the very institution that brought Buhari and Idiagbon to power. Babangida hears these complaints in corridors, at mess dinners, in whispered conversations over beer and suya late at night. He listens, nods sympathetically, never quite agreeing, never quite disagreeing. His gift is not just charisma. It is the ability to become a mirror, reflecting back to each man the version of reality he wants to see. In a private conversation, one colonel vents his frustration. Idiagbon treats us like recruits, he says, voice tight with anger. We fought in the Civil War. We bled for this country. Now a man cannot even come late to a briefing without being lectured as if he is a boy. Ibrahim smiles, places a hand on the colonel's shoulder. Discipline is necessary, he says smoothly. But you are right. We must also respect experience. I understand, others do too. Let us be patient. Patience in this context is not a virtue. It is a countdown. Tunde is not blind to the discontent, but he misreads its depth. He believes that once results become visible, once corruption is truly curbed, once order takes root, even those who now complain will look back and understand. He underestimates how many people prefer the old, flexible system, with its allowances for personal survival, to a new order that feels like a constant examination. They keep failing. The clock on his wall becomes more than a timepiece. It is a silent rebuke. Months pass. Some indicators improve. Crime in certain cities drops. Revenue collection at ports becomes less leaky. A handful of high-profile corruption cases send a message that even once untouchable figures can fall. But the larger picture remains harsh. Inflation bites. Jobs do not magically appear. For the average Nigerian, the moral satisfaction of seeing a greedy politician jailed does not fill an empty stomach. In meetings, voices that once echoed Tunde's uncompromising tone now begin to introduce small qualifiers. Perhaps we can relax enforcement in some areas. Maybe the next phase of war against indiscipline should focus more on education, less on punishment. Sir, the officers are tired. The men in the ranks are complaining about their families. We must consider morale. Each suggestion lands on Tunde's desk like a request to dilute medicine that is already not strong enough. He rejects most of them, sometimes with sharp words that sting more than he realizes. The image of the Iron Lieutenant hardens. Those who fear him keep their distance. Those who resent him smile in his presence and curse him in private. Through it all, the rivalry with Babangida ripens into something that no longer needs words. They still sit at the same tables, attend the same ceremonies, exchange salutes and formal courtesies, but their philosophies move further apart with each passing month. One afternoon, after a particularly tense Supreme Military Council meeting, in which Tunde has pushed yet another strict decree through, Ibrahim lingers in the corridor, watching him stride away. He is in a hurry to remake the country. An officer standing beside Ibrahim mutters, "He will break it if he's not careful." "No," Babangida replies softly, almost sadly. "He will break himself first." The deadline Tunde once set in his own mind, 2 years to reset Nigeria's moral compass, approaches. There is no clear plan for a return to civilian rule, no timetable that reassures politicians, businessmen, and foreign partners that the soldiers will eventually go back to the barracks. Pressure builds not just from outside, but from within. Officers who once tolerated hardship in the name of reform now want to know how long this intense, joyless discipline will last. In early 1985, as the regime contemplates a reshuffle and new phases of war against indiscipline, an opportunity appears that seems, at first glance, completely unrelated to power politics. The annual Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca, Nigeria, with its large Muslim population, sends a delegation each year. This time, it is decided that Tunde will lead it. Some advisors raise quiet concerns. The timing is delicate. The mood in the military is uncertain. Leaving the seat of power, even temporarily, might signal vulnerability. "Sir, perhaps another senior officer can go in your place," one suggests carefully. Tunde shakes his head. His religious duty matters to him, but so does the symbolism. He is known for harshness. He wants to show that he is also a man of faith, that sacrifice and discipline are not merely political tools, but spiritual commitments. "If we govern as if we answer to no one," he says, "we become the very thing we removed. I will go and I will return. The work will continue." In the days before his departure, the routine at Doden Barracks seems deceptively normal. Files are signed, directives issued, briefings held. Babangida, as Chief of Army Staff, will remain in Nigeria, overseeing the military in Tunde's absence. At the farewell, cameras capture images that, years later, will be replayed with an almost painful irony. The two men smiling, exchanging handshakes, surrounded by other officers, who hide their calculations behind polite expressions. At the airport, as the engines of the government aircraft spool up, Tunde walks across the tarmac with his usual brisk stride. In his briefcase are papers outlining the next phases of war against indiscipline, notes on pending economic measures, correspondence with foreign partners. In his mind, the clock is still ticking toward reforms not yet completed, battles not yet fought. He believes that he is stepping away for a short interval, a pause in which his body will travel, but his will remains anchored in Lagos. He does not see, as he climbs the stairs into the plane, the way some eyes follow him with a different calculation. The awareness that once he is airborne, a certain weight will lift from Doden Barracks, that chains of command can be tested, that conversations, too dangerous to hold when he is just a corridor away, can now unfold behind closed doors. The door of the aircraft closes. Inside, Tunde straps himself in, the whine of the engines rising, the runway stretching ahead like a promise of spiritual cleansing and brief escape from the suffocating routines of power. Outside, on the ground he's leaving behind, another clock begins to tick more loudly, kept not on a wall, but in the minds of men who have grown tired of iron discipline and hungry for a different kind of leadership. As the plane lifts into the haze above Lagos, the man who has spent his life racing against time to drag a reluctant nation toward order does not know that, for him, time and power is almost over, and that the rival whose easy charm once seemed merely a contrast to his severity is now, quietly, counting down the final hours of his rule. The irony is almost cruel. The man who has spent years barking orders in starched khaki now stands in Mecca wrapped in two simple, white cloths, indistinguishable from thousands of other pilgrims. While armored vehicles crawl through the streets of Lagos, while soldiers fan out toward radio stations and road junctions, Tunde Idiagbon shuffles in a slow, patient circle around the Kaaba, lips moving silently in prayer. In that moment, the distance between the holy city and Doden Barracks is more than miles. It is the distance between a life he believes is still his and a life that is already slipping away. The first sign walks toward him on tired feet, not on a television screen. A member of the Nigerian delegation, face pale beneath the desert sun, pushes through the crowd of pilgrims and leans close, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "Sir, there has been an announcement in Lagos." The words are wrong. Announcements are for decrees, not for storms. Tunde feels the hairs on his neck rise. What kind of announcement? He asks, still keeping his voice steady. The man hesitates, glances around as if the marble walls might be listening. General Babangida has taken over. They say there was no bloodshed. They say the people welcome a softer approach. For a heartbeat, the world narrows to the thud of his own pulse. Somewhere behind him, a group of pilgrims begins to chant, their voices rising and falling like waves on a distant shore. He stares past the messenger, not really seeing the sea of white robes, the ancient stone, the sky. In Lagos, the clock on his wall has stopped, but in his mind another timer starts, cruel and precise. How long before the new regime decides what to do with him? He finds a quiet corner away from the swirl of worship. The air smells of dust and perfume, sweat and incense. For the first time since he was a young officer facing enemy fire, he is forced to consider the possibility that his next uniform will not be one he chooses. Political history in Nigeria is littered with men who lost power and then lost their lives. He knows the files. He signed some of the orders. Now, he may become one of the examples that future officers study in whispers. Within hours, the radio in his hotel room becomes a lifeline and a weapon. Static crackles, then a voice, calm, confident, practiced, floats across the distance. This is General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, head of state and commander-in-chief. The rival he has watched for months with wary eyes now speaks as if the position was always his. Babangida promises a new beginning, a government with a human face, reforms without brutality, discipline without fear. He speaks of correcting the excesses of the previous regime, of reaching out to civilians, of loosening the tight fist that had clamped around the nation. Tunde listens without moving, hands folded, jaw clenched. Each phrase lands like a carefully aimed bullet. Excesses, harshness, inflexibility. He hears not just a change of government, but a rewriting of the story, a framing that casts his years of sacrifice as overreach, his war against indiscipline as a kind of mistake. The message beneath the smooth words is clear. Your time is over. Your methods will be disowned. Your rival will now define what you were. When the broadcast ends, an aide asks the question hanging over the room. Sir, should we request asylum? Others have done it. You would not be the first. The image appears unbidden. Himself in some foreign capital, reduced to giving bitter interviews from a rented apartment. His story, filtered through reporters hungry for scandal. He thinks of the men whose files he once read, the ones who fled and were never truly heard again. He thinks of his father's house in Ilorin, of the earth of his own country. No, he says, the word heavy but firm. If they want to judge me, let them do it in Nigeria. I will return. The decision turns the time limit into something sharper. Every hour brings new uncertainty. Will he be allowed to land? Will he be arrested on the tarmac? Will he see his family again as a free man or through the bars of a detention cell? The flight home, when it comes, feels like a slow-motion approach to an invisible line that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. At the airport in Lagos, the air is thick with humidity and tension. Soldiers in new loyalties stand at attention, their faces carefully neutral. The insignia on their uniforms has not changed, but the direction of their salutes has, as Tunde descends the steps of the plane, every eye is silently asking the same question. What will they do with him? There is no dramatic arrest in front of cameras. That would be untidy. Instead, an officer he knows, one who once stood ramrod straight during war against indisciplined briefings, steps forward with a politeness that cuts more than any barked command. Sir, you are welcome, he says. The new head of state has made arrangements for your safety. A vehicle is waiting. The word safety has never sounded less reassuring. Tunde nods once and gets into the car. As the convoy pulls away from the airport, he catches a glimpse of the city through tinted glass. Lagos looks the same. Traffic in chaotic knots, hawkers weaving between cars, billboards peeling under the sun. But something fundamental has shifted. It is as if a building he thought solid has been quietly hollowed out. Only the outer walls remain. The place they take him to is neither a dungeon nor a palace. It is a secure house, with guards at the gate, barred windows, and an uncomfortable neatness that suggests both hospitality and surveillance. Here, time changes texture. In Doden Barracks, his days were a blur of meetings, decisions, signatures. Here, the minutes stretch. Prayers mark the structure of his routine. Dawn, midday, afternoon, sunset, night. Between them, there's reading, reflection, the occasional carefully monitored conversation with an officer sent to check on his welfare. No one uses the word prison, but the way all questions about his future are deflected is answer enough. In one of those visits, a younger officer, clearly nervous, ventures into dangerous territory. Sir, there are those who say you were too hard, that if you had been more flexible, this might not have happened. that the people might have embraced your reforms instead of fearing them. Tunde's response is quiet, but his eyes are steady. Flexibility, as he repeats? Do they now have discipline and freedom? Or indiscipline and new chains? The officer has no answer. Outside the gates, the new regime begins to move in directions Tunde had resisted. Negotiations with international creditors restart. Talk of structural adjustment returns, dressed in smoother language. Promises of a quick transition to civilian rule start to flow, each one carrying its own implied deadline. 6 months, 2 years, 1990, 1992, 1993. Each date is a kind of calendar the nation pins its hopes to, only to see the pages torn away. From his confinement, Tunde watches the familiar rival on television, smiling beside visiting dignitaries, shaking hands with bankers, and diplomats who once scolded Nigeria and now praise its pragmatism. The contrast is bitter. The man who refused to bow now sits in enforced stillness, while the man who talked of balance and options now walks freely among the world's decision-makers. Eventually, the regime decides that Tunde is safer as a retired officer than as a martyr. The day his confinement formally ends is almost anticlimactic. A letter arrives filled with the language of protocol: honorable service, retirement benefits, appreciation. No mention of the fact that his name has been quietly removed from the center of power and filed away like a document stamped "no longer required." He returns to Ilorin, to a house that becomes both refuge and quiet command post, of a different kind. The neighborhood adjusts quickly to the presence of the once feared Major General. Children who were toddlers when war against indiscipline posters hung on walls now see him as the serious man who drives himself to the mosque at dawn, who keeps his compound tidy, who expects visitors to arrive on time. The discipline he once tried to impose on a nation now applies, in miniature, to his own surroundings. He rises before the call to prayer, as he always has. Even without files to sign or officers to summon, his days are structured with military precision. Prayers, reading, receiving visitors. A time with family, reflection. A clock still hangs on the wall, but it no longer counts down to decrees. It measures the more subtle urgency of a man who feels history. Moving past him like a river he can no longer dam. People come. Former colleagues, some embarrassed, some defiant. Politicians who once groveled before his signature now appear in carefully tailored agbadas, speaking the language of democracy and reconciliation. Young activists, not yet born when he first put on a general's uniform, arrive full of questions and admiration, insisting that Nigeria needs strong men of principle to rescue it from new forms of corruption. "Sir, you should speak out," one of them pleads. "Not the people trust you. They remember your war against indiscipline. They say at least you were not a thief. If you talk now, you can correct the lies they tell about those days." He listens, fingers interlaced, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the sitting room. A soldier who loses power and then spends his days talking on the radio, he says, quickly turns his story into a weapon for others. They pick only the pieces that serve their purpose. "I will not be used," the young man protests, but silence allows them to define you. Tunde's reply is almost weary. History will judge, not press conferences. Yet even in silence, he cannot fully escape the tug of the nation's timetable. The promised transitions come and go. Elections are scheduled, postponed, conducted, annulled. The most cruel of these moments arrives with the 1993 presidential election, when Nigerians pour out to vote in numbers that surprise even the optimists. When the result is widely believed to favor Moshood Abiola, and the military annals the outcome, protests erupt, hope turns to anger, and the country stumbles into another cycle of unrest and repression. From Ilorin, Tunde watches this on screen, the images flickering against the wall of his sitting room. Crowds waving placards, soldiers, firing tear gas, politicians speaking in guarded phrases. He recognizes in the language of the new rulers the same old tricks: appeals to security, to stability, to national interest, used now not to enforce discipline but to defend broken promises. His rivalry with Babangida, once fought in cabinet meetings and policy debates, becomes something more ghostly. They no longer face each other across a table. Instead, their legacies wrestle in the public mind. One man is remembered as a charming strategist, whose years in power produced both grand projects and deep disappointments, whose retirement is shadowed by unanswered questions about corruption and betrayal. The other, Tunde, is recalled as the stern disciplinarian whose rule was short, whose methods were harsh, but whose personal life remained stubbornly free from visible wealth. In the jokes and curses of ordinary Nigerians, in the comparisons made at beer parlors and bus stops, the rivalry continues. "At least with Idiagbon you knew where you stood," someone says. "Ah, but could you talk then?" another replies. They would lock you up for saying what you are saying now. Between these extremes, a more complicated picture emerges. But it takes time. And time, for Tunde, is no longer an abstract concept. His body begins to send signals that even his iron will cannot ignore. A persistent fatigue that does not vanish with rest. Shortness of breath after simple tasks. A tightness in his chest that sometimes feels like an invisible fist. Doctors speak of hypertension, of stress carried silently for too many years, of the wear and tear of a life lived in constant readiness for battle. He hears their advice, nods, adjusts his routine but does not fundamentally slow down. There is still a sense, unspoken but present, that one more chapter might yet be written. The end of the 1990s brings whispers of real change. A transition not just promised, but actively prepared, with parties forming, candidates emerging, a tentative schedule for elections that seems, for once, to be more than a mirage. Visitors grow bolder. "Sir, this is the time," one former subordinate insists. "The civilians are weak, the people are tired of thieves. If you step forward, even to give your blessing to a candidate, it will signal that not all soldiers are the same. You cannot leave your story unfinished." The phrase lands deeply, unfinished. It speaks to the part of him that still sees Nigeria as a mission half completed, a building whose foundations were laid with pain, and whose walls were never allowed to rise. The idea of a deadline returns, not as a decree on a government calendar, but as a private reckoning. Democracy is coming, they say. Elections are scheduled for 1999. If he is to shape this new order, even indirectly, he must decide soon. How many more Ramadan fasts, how many more rainy seasons does he realistically have? He begins quietly, to meet more often with people connected to the emerging political class. Not to plot a dramatic comeback, that is not his style, but to probe, to test, to see if any of these men and women share the severity of purpose he still believes the country needs. In these conversations, a new kind of tension arises. The clash between his rigid belief in discipline and the messy compromises of party politics. A young politician, eager and articulate, tries to bridge the gap. "Sir, if we insist on purity, we will have no candidates," he argues. "Democracy is like a market. You bargain, you accept that some people are flawed, but still better than the alternative. And if your flawed leaders steal?" Tunde asks. "If they sell policy for contracts? If they treat the treasury like a personal wallet? Do we say, it is democracy, we must be flexible?" The anger in his voice surprises even him. The word flexible tastes no better on his tongue now than it did in those late-night meetings with Babangida. He realizes, with a flicker of something like sadness, that the same line that once made him effective, the refusal to bend, may now keep him at the margins of a system built on negotiation and trade-offs. Then, swiftly, the deadline he has been circling without naming steps out of the shadows. In early 1999, as Nigeria inches toward the elections that are supposed to end 15 years of almost uninterrupted military rule, Tunde falls ill. At first, it seems like another spell of fatigue, something that rest and medication can handle. But the symptoms intensify. The man who once marched briskly through inspection lines now struggles to cross a room without pausing to catch his breath. Pain grips his chest with a ferocity that no battlefield ever matched. Rumors multiply, as they always do when powerful men falter. Some say it is simply the accumulated burden of a life under pressure. Others, more conspiratorial, whisper about poison, about old enemies unwilling to risk his voice in the coming democratic era. No clear evidence emerges, only a fog of speculation in which fear and imagination dance. In the hospital in Ilorin, the atmosphere is strangely calm. Machines beep, nurses move with practiced efficiency. Family members whisper prayers in corridors, rosaries of Arabic words strung together with tears. Tunde, lying on the bed, is not thinking about coups or decrees. His world has shrunk to pain, to flashes of memory, to the sensation of time folding back on itself. He sees in fragments the boy running barefoot through Ilorin's dusty streets, the young officer in a crisp uniform, the stern deputy, head of state watching soldiers enforce queues, the pilgrim in Mecca, whose world tilted under the weight of a whispered sentence. He hears again the word that has haunted his public life, flexible, and feels both vindicated and isolated by his refusal to embrace it. A doctor bends over him, voice low. "We are doing our best, sir. You must rest." In his mind, another doctor speaks, this time to the body of the nation he tried to heal with harsh medicine. "We are doing our best. You must endure." It is not clear which patient he worries about more. On March 2nd, 1999, as Nigeria's political class busies itself with campaigns and alliances, with manifestos and rallies, Major General Tunde Idiagbon's clock runs out. The man who once tried to impose timetables on a reluctant country leaves his own appointment with history not by decree but by the quiet, unstoppable logic of a failing heart. News of his death spreads quickly, but the reactions are not uniform. In Ilorin, crowds gather spontaneously. Some come out of respect for a native son who rose high. Others come because, even in death, his name still carries the weight of seriousness in a time when public life often feels like a game. They line the streets, not in the forced queues of war against indiscipline, but in the loose, organic rows of people who have chosen to stand witness. Older men shake their heads and talk of the days when litter disappeared, when civil servants trembled at the thought of arriving. Late, when even generals could be audited. Younger Nigerians, whose direct memories of his time in office are faint or non-existent, ask questions. Was he really that strict? Did he really flog people for coming late to work? Is it true he died with no mansion in Victoria Island, no foreign account? The answers vary, colored by personal experience, by political preference, by the passage of years. Some remember the humiliation of public punishments, the fear of speaking openly. Others recall, with something like longing, a sense that for a brief, uncomfortable period, someone in power was willing to endure unpopularity in order to force a change in national habits. In the commentary that follows, in articles and discussions, the rivalry with Babangida resurfaces in a new form. One man is alive, his name often invoked when Nigerians talk about the roots of their economic struggles and the corruption that flourished. Under structural adjustment, the other is dead, his memory carried in stories that grow sharper or softer depending on who tells them. History has a way of forgiving the dead and prosecuting the living, one columnist writes. We must resist the temptation to turn Idiagbon into a saint simply because he is gone. His methods were harsh, his respect for civil liberties limited. But neither should we forget that, in an age of greedy rulers, he lived and died without obvious spoils. The legacy that begins to form is not a simple one. For some, Tunde becomes a symbol of the road not taken, a vision of a Nigeria that might have chosen brutal discipline in exchange for long-term reform and then flinched at the pain. For others, he serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing that virtue gives you the right to coerce a whole nation into goodness. Yet beneath the debates, a quieter inheritance emerges, almost in spite of his intentions. Children who never saw soldiers at bus stops now learn about war against indiscipline in civics classes. They roll their eyes, they laugh at the idea of being whipped for dropping paper on the street, but the phrase stays with them. In certain offices, a sign still hangs. Office resumes at 8 by A, Monsieur Prompt. An old civil servant might mutter, in Idiagbon's time, you would never dare come late. The habits Tunde tried to impose by force prove fragile. Many fade once the fear is gone. But the questions he forced Nigerians to confront, about corruption, about public morality, about the relationship between freedom and order, do not disappear. They resurface in new forms, in debates about anti-graft agencies, about traffic laws, about environmental sanitation, about what it means to be a serious nation. In the end, his story becomes part of a larger narrative that refuses neat conclusions. The rival who outmaneuvered him lives on, carrying his own unfinished chapters and unanswered accusations. The country they both tried to shape continues to wrestle with the same demons: indiscipline and injustice, corruption and hope. The deadlines they set, for reform, for transition, for moral renewal, have all been missed, extended, rewritten. But somewhere in Ilorin, in a grave visited by those who still believe in the power of personal integrity, a man lies whose life poses a question that has not yet expired. How far can a leader go in forcing a nation to be better than it wants to be, before the very effort destroys both the leader and the trust he seeks to build? The answer is not written on any tombstone. It is written, instead, in the ongoing struggle of a country still searching for a balance between the hard edge of discipline and the softer, messier demands of freedom. A struggle that began long before Tunde Idiagbon put on a uniform, and that continues long after the clock on his wall fell silent.